and misunderstandings about money. We need to clear them up, because if you want to understand the current cost of living crisis and also the massive increase in inequality over COVID, you need to understand what money is. So this is going to be super important for the viewer to understand. Very number one thing people need to understand, money is not real resources. So lots of very wealthy people don't actually have huge amounts of money. They have largely real resources. Money is a separate thing. We're going to explain that. Now, one of the reasons why money is confusing is there are actually a couple of different ideas around what money is bouncing around. And the best way to explain that is, I think, to go through an example. So let's imagine I've got £1,000 and you've got nothing. Then I lend you for a week my £1,000. How much money do you have then? It's an interesting question, right? Because on the one hand, you've got £1,000 in your pocket that I just gave you. But on the other hand, you have a debt of £1,000 to me, right? So you literally physically have £1,000, but as an individual, when you consider how much money you have, you should also consider your debts, right? So if we consider also your debts, you don't have any money. You've got £1,000 and £1,000 of debt. But if we just consider how much cash you have on hand, you have £1,000. The next question is, how much money do I have? So I've given you all my money, my £1,000. So you could say I don't have any money, but you owe me £1,000 and I'm going to get it in a week. So if we consider all of my money, including money owed to me, I've got £1,000. Now, most economists, if they looked at that situation, would say that once I've lent you £1,000, we both have £1,000. That's interesting, right? So once the loan is made, the amount of money is doubled, okay? And I think this captures the complication we have with understanding what is money. Because some people would say, if you have money but you also have debt, then you don't have money. Some people would say, well, if you have the money, it doesn't matter whether you have debt or not. Some people would say, well, if you've lent the money out, you don't have money. And some people would say, well, if you have money owed to you, you have money. Basically, do I need to have that cash in my pocket for it to be money? Do I need to have no debt for it to be money? If I have somebody owing me money tomorrow, do I have money? And the reason this is complicated is most people's money is cash in the bank, right? But actually, when your money is in the bank account, the bank doesn't actually have that money in many cases. That's money that they owe to you. So there's a complication here about whether we should include debt and whether we should include money that is owed to you. And I'm going to argue that yes, we should include debt, and yes, we should include money that is owed to you. And in a way, we have to include money that is owed to you, because any money you have in the bank account is money that is owed to you. So essentially, everything that ordinary people think of as money, with the exception of cash, is money that is owed to you. So these are the fundamental problems in understanding it, okay? And we're going to run through it all so that everybody can understand really clearly what is what, okay? So the first thing I'm going to say is, as an individual, when I ask you the question of how much money do you have, you should consider all your cash. Most people don't actually keep that much cash. Any money you have in the bank, any money that you have owed to you, and also any debts that you have. That is your total situation with regards to money. It doesn't really make sense if you borrow £1 million and you have to pay that back in a year to say I'm a millionaire now. You have to include your debts. It makes sense, right? So as an individual, you should include everything. So then why is it that economists don't do that? In order to understand that, I think we need to rewind a bit and go back to the understanding of how money is created. Because this is another story around which there's some confusion. So for example, there are a lot of people who will say to you, when a bank lends you money, they don't actually give you that money, they just create the money out of thin air. And And I think that's quite misleading. And I will explain why. The only people who are allowed to print cash and create money out of thin air are the central banks. So in this country, the Bank of England. In the US, it's the Federal Reserve. In Europe, it's the European Central Bank, the ECB, okay? These guys literally can create money. Nobody else can. And we'll get later to why people think that commercial banks can. But central banks are not allowed to give money out. So then if they're the only guys who can create money, but they can't give money out, how do we have money? And the answer is they loan money out. They loan money out. Central banks only ever make loans. So they create money. They make loans to commercial banks, Lloyds Bank, NatWest, other banks are available. And then those banks themselves make loans. So the money gets loaned out. But what that means is quite interesting, which means that all money originates as a loan. Now, since if you borrow money, you also have a debt with it, that means that whenever there is money, there is also debt. That means that if I add up the total amount of money and the total amount of debt in the economy, it will always add up to zero. Now, this is a fundamental truism of our money system as it exists in this country, in Europe, in the US, in Australia, and most of the rich world. The total amount of money add up, including the total amount of debt, is always zero. It's always zero. And that is important to understand. Because if we know that, then we also know that if one group of people go into a massive amount of debt, for example, mortgage holders or the government, somebody else must be accumulating money or credit. That is really important to understand because it was that fundamental understanding that enabled me at the beginning of COVID to know that, okay, well, if the government is going to accumulate 250 billion, 450 billion of debt, somebody's going to accumulate money elsewhere in the system because we know that these two sides always balance up. It's basically an accounting equation. Okay, so this is the fundamental truism of monetary systems as they are at the moment, that they always add up to zero. That's the way that they're designed. And that is because money is always created by a loan. And if the only way to create money is to create debt, then these two things are always aligned. They're always balanced. So we know with 100% certainty that the amount of money plus the amount of credit is equal to the amount of debt. Now, I've separated out there money and credit. When I say credit, it means money you are owed. And I think for simplicity, it's probably best to say that anything you have other than cash in your pocket is credit. So money you have in the bank is money owed to you, for example. And really, it probably makes it easier to understand the monetary system if you just assume that everything is credit. It's just a balanced system of who owes money to who. Who owes money to who? There's always a balanced amount of credit and a balanced amount of debt. Fundamentally, whenever there is money, there is somebody who owes that money. And whenever there is debt, there is somebody that money is owed to. It has to balance. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive, and the reason is because people don't think about money like that. If you have £10,000 cash, cash in your pocket or cash in your bank, you don't think somebody else has £10,000 in debt. You as an individual can have £10,000 of cash without any debt. But it is not possible for society to have £10,000 of cash without debt because the way that the monetary system is designed is that money is only ever created by the creation of debt. So they are always balanced. And on a societal aggregate level, they're always balanced. Now, then that raises an interesting question of, well, if the total amount of money in society is always zero, does that mean the total amount of money in society is constant? What about things like QE? What about things like the central bank cutting interest rates? We hear that the central bank can change the amount of money in the system. And that is because what the central bank can do is make more loans. So they can lend a lot of money into the system. So imagine I'm the central bank and you're the economy. And I lend you £1,000. You've got £1,000 of cash and you have £1,000 of debt. You're balanced. But then what I can do as a central bank is I can lend you another £10,000. Now you've got £11,000 of cash and £11,000 of debt. You're still balanced, but there's more loans floating around. And once you think about money creation like that, you realize that, in a sense, anybody can do that. If you remember the example that we had at the beginning of this discussion, I said, well, if I have £1,000, you have nothing, and then I lend you £1,000, in a way, we've both got £1,000. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And this is worth sitting and thinking about, because this explains to us the two different understandings of what is money. One of them says that whenever a new loan is created, both people have the money. And that means whenever there is lending, money is being created. And one of them says, no, you have to include all of the debt and all of the credit. And in that sense, the system is always zero. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, this is not super simple, but it's important to understand. And the difference between those two ways of understanding money are at the center of so much argument of people on the internet. And it's basically, some people say that, it's some people thinking in the sense of, you have to include all the debt in the system. And some people saying, you have to include both sides. So if I lend you money, we both have the money. Now, if you, and this is the way that most economists think about money. They think, when I lend you money, £1,000, then we've both got £1,000. They think that all money lending creates new money. So if you believe that all lending creates new money, then it is true that commercial banks create money. But they only create money by creating debt. So commercial banks cannot change the fact that the total amount of money always equals the total amount of debt. They cannot change that. And in fact, nobody can change that. That is a part of the design of the system, the monetary system in Western economies, in Britain, in the US. But because commercial banks can make loans, some people say commercial banks can create money. And it is true that, say you went to Lloyds Bank and you say, I want to borrow £1 million, and they accept your loan, they will simply credit your bank with your account with £1 million. That is true. And you might think, oh, they've created money. But as soon as you try and spend that £1 million, they have to actually pay it out of the money that they have. It's a little bit like, if I said to you, I've got £1,000, and I say, I'm going to lend you £1,000, but I'm going to keep it on account for you. And you say, okay, fine, okay. You've got this account, £1,000. And of course, I can just write that account and say, Simran, £1,000. It's on the account. I've just created money. But as soon as you take the money out, I have to give it to you. You see what I'm saying? I haven't actually created any money. All I've said is, if you want the money, you can have it. So, hopefully that captures the situation here. The only people who can actually create money are the central bank. The only way they inject that into the system is by making loans. That means that within the economy, money always balances perfectly debt. But anyone, including central banks, including individuals, can make loans. And when loans are made, that means essentially many people are accessing the same money. I'm saying, I've got £1,000, but if you want to use it, you can use it. We can both use the same £1,000. But it doesn't take that balance out of the system. Money is always equal to debt. So that raises a question, right? If central banks can only lend money, they can't give money, then who can give money into the economy? And the answer is, really anybody can give money into the economy. If I borrow money from you and then give it away, then I'm in debt. And since you know that debt equals money, if I go into debt, then the rest of the system has positive money. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. But what the power the government has is they can borrow enormous amounts of money and give it out. And then what that does is it, in a sense, puts the rest of the system out of balance. It means that the rest of the system is suddenly no longer adding up to zero. So since the beginning of COVID, the government has increased its debt by £700 billion. And since we know that the system as a whole, debt always equals total money, we know that the rest of the individuals in the game have to have £700 billion. They must have £700 billion. So we know that the average UK adult, because there's about 50 million UK adults, must have an extra £14,000 since the beginning of COVID. We know these things with certainty. And it's just a question of who has that money. It's just a question of who has that money. So, and then this sort of brings us onto other questions like what is QE, what does the central bank do? And I think we'll go on to them in future videos. But to summarize, at its heart, money is a loan from the central bank. And then that circulates throughout the economy. Some people go into debt, which means other people go into credit. The total amount of debt always equals the total amount of credit. So we know, for example, the average UK adult has, was it £30,000 of mortgage debt?
I think that, yeah.
We did that in the debt video. So we know that the average UK adult must have £30,000 of mortgage credit. We know that the government has increased its debt by £14,000 per adult. So we know the average UK adult has increased their credit by £14,000. And hopefully I'm communicating that there are these two different conceptions of money, one of which includes all debt, includes all credit, and always adds up to zero. And one of which is about total amount of loans in the system. They're both important. If there are loads and loads of loans in the system, what will happen is the interest rate will fall. But it's not the same as the government going into debt and giving huge amounts of money out. Basically, the central bank can lend money, and that brings interest rates down. But the government can give money, and that causes cash accumulation amongst individuals. Since the beginning of COVID, the government has increased its debt by 700 billion. We know that cash has accumulated amongst individuals. It's not the same as QE, right? There's two things happening here. QE is another form of central bank lending. It's more loans in the system. I think we'll do that in the next video, QE. This £700 billion is not QE. This is the total amount of government debt accumulated since COVID. It's money that the government has either printed or borrowed and given out. But either way, if I print money and give it to you, you have more money. If I borrow money from you and give it to you, you have more money, because money and money owed to you are very similar things. If I borrow money and give it back to you, you have the money and you have the money owed to you. So, do you think that's clear?
Yeah.
So I think this is the key thing I want people to understand. Money it's a balanced system. It's a balance point system. We know it. Some people are in debt, some people are in credit. If you have mortgage debt, somebody has credit. If the government is in debt, somebody has credit. And it's a system of who owes money to who. And of course, the people who are in debt constantly need to find ways to get that money from the people who are in credit. Otherwise, they can't pay their debts back. So really, it's a points-based system. It's perfectly balanced throughout society. But the problem is, in many cases, it is a small amount of very wealthy people who are in credit, and it's the government and a large amount of mortgage-holding individuals who are in debt. So it creates an imbalance. And the people who are in debt, such as the government, which means the taxpayer, and families who have mortgages, have to constantly find money to pay to the rich. But that's it. Money is a balanced system. Comes from the central bank. Commercial banks, they can't create money, but they can create loans. And if you create loans, it, in some senses, seems like more money being made because people have money, even though they have debt against it, have access to money. But crucially, what is most important for this channel and for the message of this channel, that £700 billion is the increase in government debt, which means we know there has been an increase in private holding of money to the extent of £14,000 for every adult in the country, which is increasing. In most cases, that money is sitting in the bank accounts of wealthy individuals, which means your average wealthy individual has accumulated £100,000, £200,000 extra cash since the beginning of COVID. This is not per household, it's per adult, right? So it really is a huge amount of money. And this is not money they've borrowed. It's money they've essentially been given, ultimately, from government. And this is how it was very easy to predict at the very beginning of COVID that there would be a massive increase in asset prices. And I think what's quite interesting is now, so we're filming this in the middle of January. Last week, both the gold price and the stock price of the FTSE 100 came within 1% of a new all-time high. And that's interesting because economists and traders will normally say gold goes up when the economy is weak and stocks go up when the economy is strong. But both of these things have gone up massively. And I predicted this at the beginning of COVID. And in my opinion, the reason for that is the government has given out a huge amount of money. That has ended up being held by rich individuals. It's hundreds of thousands of pounds for every rich individual. They tend to buy assets. You know, they buy all kinds of assets. They'll buy stocks and property and gold. So all asset prices go up. Doesn't matter whether the economy is bad or good, simply because these guys have so much money. The flip side of it is the government is in a huge amount of debt. Partially that's QE funded. We'll do that in the next video. But they have to pay interest to the rich every single month. And for that reason, that is why they're saying we can't afford to do things. And both of these things have consequences. The debt of the government hurts public services and it hurts public sector pay, creates austerity. But the credit of the rich pushes up asset prices and it pushes up other prices too. This relates to the thing we said at the very beginning of this video, which is money is not real resources. So ultimately, money is a token that you use to buy real resources. So if these guys, the rich, have a ton of money now, they're going to buy more stuff, they're going to push the price up, and you, the ordinary person of this country, will get less stuff. So this amount of money, 700 billion, is unbelievably large. From the very beginning of COVID, I've said it will overwhelm basically all other economic effects until it is resolved. It won't be resolved. It doesn't look like it's going to be resolved. So the end result is prices will stay high. They won't come back down. Especially asset prices will continue to rise and living standards will continue to fall. So that's the video. What is money? A little bit complicated, but it's something that's important for people to understand if they want to understand what is happening with the economy. We're going to do more explanatory videos, but the key message here is the government has gone enormously into debt. That means somebody has increased their money holding. My analysis says it's overwhelmingly the rich. That increases inequality. That increases asset prices and price in the shops, and it decreases living standards for ordinary people. Okay, so there's one point I want to add on money, which I think is very important for people to understand, which is, I think, one common incorrect way that people conceptualize money is they think of it as if it is a finite resource. So imagine I had like a pile of firewood, okay? And then I burn the firewood bit by bit over the course of a month, and then there's no firewood left, and then there's no fire. We need to go get some more firewood. People think about money as if it's like that, because from the perspective of an individual, it kind of is like that. If you spend all your money, then money runs out. And then, for example, during COVID, the government spent a lot of money. So then there's this kind of perception that, well, the government spent a load of money, we've run out of firewood, we all need to be poor now. There's nothing we can do. But money always is up to zero. Always is up to zero. Money, from the perspective of society, cannot run out. It can only pass from person to person. It can only be held. So if the government has accumulated a huge amount of debt, all that means is some other group of society has gotten rich. And it doesn't mean that we as a society have lost our resources. It's very, very important to understand that money is not real resources. Money is, I think I described it in another video, as a competitive resource or a distributional resource. Money is only used to determine who gets the real resources. And if you have lost a load of money, that can only be because somebody else has gotten a load of money, because we know with guaranteed certainty the total amount adds up to zero. And I think this idea that money, we've run out of money, I mean, it's really powerful in politics. You know, the big thing is after 2010, when the Labour government was voted out and the Conservative government was voted in, there's this, we've run out of money, there's no more money. There's no more money. And it's totally impossible. And because money is only a distributional resource, we know that if a problem can be fixed by distribution of money, we know that that problem can only be a distributional problem. You cannot fix a lack of resources with money. It's not possible. Because money is not resources, and money cannot create resources. If you don't have enough energy, you need to go and get some more energy. You know, you need to get some more coal or some more wind power or some more firewood, whatever you're using for energy. You can't make it out of money. But I think it's been used powerfully against the Labour Party. They've said, you know, they spent all the money. But it's actually quite powerful to understand that money can never run out. Resources can run out. And, you know, there may be instances, you know, for example, this year just gone, we've seen there's been less energy and the energy price has gone up. Resources can run out, but money can never run out. The government can never run out of money. If the government has run out of money, somebody has that money. If the government has gone into debt, somebody has that debt. It's really important to understand. Money, you as an individual can run out of money, but society can never run out of money. And if the government has gone into debt, it is because somebody has accumulated money. So it's always in balance.